Your phone can be cracked via two different attacks: HDMI radiation exposing your data, malicious Bitwarden, the password manager, is out there and will teach you how to not fall for it. Brave got a new feature, and more. Welcome to Surveillance Report 204, where we are dedicated to keeping you safe with the latest news in the past week. I'm Henry from Techlore.
I'm Nathan from The New Oil.
And our promo segment this week is to support what we're doing. We do this every week. We both try to navigate around our other projects and our travel schedules, and we still try to prioritize this every week as best as we can. And we couldn't do it without some of our wonderful supporters on Patreon, LibrePay, and people who tip us Monero. So on Patreon, you get access to a sponsor-free / promo segment-free version of this podcast, so you never have to skip anything, and we also leave in a lot more discussions and banter. If you listen to the highlight story, we leave a lot of it in, but we have similar discussions and other stories that we keep just for patrons. We're also on LibrePay if you don't like Patreon but still want to support what we do. And of course, Monero is the most private way to contribute to what we do, and we see your tips and we really appreciate them. And the Monero address is down in the show notes. And now the highlight story. We have a very, very interesting story here. And these are leaked documents that show what phones' secretive tech Graykey can unlock. So the Graykey is a phone unlocking and forensics tool that is used by law enforcement around the world. And it's only able to retrieve partial data from modern iPhones that run iOS 18 or iOS 18.0.1. Although its main competitor Celebrite has faced similar leaks before, this is the first time anyone has published which phones the Graykey is able or unable to access. So the document shows that Graykey has much less capability with iPhones running beta builds, with the document saying none for various betas of 18.1 across all modern iPhone iterations. We'll touch on that soon. It is not clear if this is because at the time of the document's creation, Magnet researchers had not invested time into cracking developing attacks against these operating systems, or if Apple has not released official figures for how many iPhones are running iOS 18 or 18.1. Now, I'm going to interject here right away. I wouldn't necessarily hop on this idea that using beta software is necessarily a security improvement. Maybe in this one specific context, it might help, but that's not even what the story says. It just says that they don't even try to develop for it because not many people use it. So maybe you would be protected, but probably not for any good tech reason. I'm sure if they still wanted to crack it, they could. And more importantly, using beta software can actually expose you to new vulnerabilities and new security issues that haven't quite been figured out yet. So maybe this would help you in this one situation, but I wouldn't necessarily make that suggestion to a lot of people. Just leave that right there. Now, in terms of Android, you might be wondering, it's a bit more mixed, likely due to the high level of variance. With Google's own Pixel, the Graykey is able to only extract partial data on the most recent Pixel devices, including the Pixel 9. This is specifically when the phone is in after first unlock state, which is not when you just reboot your device, which is the hardest state for it to be in. Although tools like Graykey or Celebrite may not be able to retrieve any data from phones running operating system versions released a month or two earlier, historically they have eventually caught up and managed to get partial information from the phones. This is the status quo where the encryption debate has somewhat settled for the time being. Forensic companies find exploits, Apple or Google fixes them or introduces new mitigations, and then the cycle continues. So very interesting stuff, and we covered the Celebrite article that exposed some of what Celebrite can leak couple months ago, I think, on one of our episodes as well. And it's really interesting to kind of see what they can crack into and what they can't crack into. Generally, the best rule of thumb that we have is try to stay as updated as possible on both hardware and software, just because you get a little bit of a time buffer. So a lot of vulnerabilities aren't necessarily found on this newer stuff yet, and so you might have more time before there's actually a way to crack into your phone. Try to have an easy way to easily restart your phone, because if you can get your phone into after boot mode, that will actually help you a lot, and a lot of these tools will actually not even work. So on your iPhone, I think if you just hold your volume and power button to power your phone off, you don't even have to power it off, and it should still reset back to that state. But if you want to be a little bit more proper, you can go ahead and force shut it down. And then last week, we just covered how Apple is actually by default to help deal with these attacks where they just take the phone, keep it for months until they can finally crack into it. Apple has now released a feature where your phone will automatically restart within a few days of you not unlocking it. Certain Android ROMs also have this feature as well with an automatic reboot. And generally speaking, the advice is pretty similar over there. So that's all I have to say on this. Again, just to summarize that, use updated hardware, use updated software, and try to restart your device or set an automatic reboot when possible.
I don't think I really have much to add to this. I do agree with you about the beta thing. I think a lot of people might view that as like an endorsement of like, oh, I should switch to beta. But I think the article even mentioned like, we don't necessarily know if the beta stuff is more secure because it's actually more secure, or it's just the article points out security is a cat and mouse game. They actually talked about, this is the status quo where forensics companies find an exploit, Apple or Google fix them or introduce new mitigations, and then the cycle continues. So what I think is much more likely is not that like these beta versions have some super secure new feature. It's probably just they're new. They've only been out for a few weeks. I mean, the people doing this are still people. It takes time to find these vulnerabilities, and the cycle's just going to keep repeating. So, and to be fair, I was kind of joking about this before we started recording. This is probably not going to affect 99% of people watching this. Most of us, I think, myself included, are probably never going to be in a situation, except maybe if you travel internationally. Unfortunately, I hear that's becoming increasingly common. But most of us are not going to be in a situation where, your phone gets confiscated by the police or anything like that, especially if you're just going about your day-to-day life. But, these vulnerabilities have a way of trickling down. There's no such thing as a backdoor that only the good guys can use. So yeah, my big takeaway here is just to be aware that this stuff is out there. Keep your stuff updated. Be careful what you put in a digital format. We always say that. Anything you put out there, especially if you put it on the internet, but even if it's local, just assume that it can be compromised. You never know what could happen. So that's not to teach you to be paranoid or anything, but just, again, keep in mind if there's any pictures that you wouldn't want getting out there, delete them. Or if there's any old software that you don't use anymore, delete it. Any old accounts, whatever, old apps. So yeah, just be mindful of your digital life. That's kind of my takeaway. With that, we'll move into data breaches. And our first one is interesting. Space tech giant Maxar confirms hacker accessed employees' personal data. So this is a company out of Colorado who operates imaging satellites and manufactures spacecraft and claims to operate one of the largest commercial satellite constellations in orbit. Maxar has long been a significant provider of commercial satellite imagery to the U.S. government, which uses the imagery for mission-critical planning, intelligence gathering, and disaster response. So pretty important stuff. The information contained within the compromised files includes employees' names, gender, physical addresses, social security numbers, business contact information, employment status, employee number, and job information. And according to the company's website, they have 2,600 employees, more than half of which have U.S. security clearances. The article didn't state exactly how many employees were impacted.
Ford rejects a breach allegation and says customer data was not impacted. So they are investigating this leak of 44,000 customer records on a hacking forum. And it supposedly contains customer information, including full names, physical locations, purchase details, dealer information, and record timestamps. And then there's an update here, which is Ford's investigation has determined that there was no breach of Ford systems or customer data. The matter involved a third-party supplier and a small batch of publicly available dealers' business addresses. It is our understanding that the matter has now been resolved.
Fintech giant Finastra is investigating a data breach. Finastra provides software and services to 45 of the world's top 50 banks, and they notified customers of the incident after a cybercriminal began selling more than 400 gigs of data allegedly stolen from the company. Finastra is based out of London, and they have offices in 42 countries and a reported $1.9 billion in revenues last year. The company has more than 7,000 employees and serves approximately 8,100 financial institutions around the world. A major part of their day-to-day business involves processing huge volumes of digital files containing instructions for wire and bank transfers on behalf of its clients. I didn't see any specific listing of what data was stolen or how many people were impacted, but interestingly, the person who posted this no longer appears to be active online, so it's really unclear if the company paid the amount and they went away because, it was a ransom, pay me and I won't leak the data, or if they got banned or arrested. It's not really clear.
In the interest of time, since sometimes our data breach section can be a little long, I'm just going to go ahead and very quickly summarize the last two here. There was a cyber attack at a French hospital that exposes health data of 750,000 patients, and they breached the Mediboard by Software Medical Group. This is used in a lot of different areas. So this includes full names, date of births, genders, home addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, physicians, prescriptions, and health card history. There is more information on which hospitals were affected in the show notes. Apparently, Andrew Tate has an online university called the Hustlers University. It's a monthly subscription for a, get rich with my plan thing, but they were breached, and it breached 794,000 usernames and also private chat servers and email addresses that belong to users. It looks like Discord is what's used for it, but it's actually Revolt.
That'll take us into the company news, and we have a couple of stories from Microsoft real quick. First, some good news. Microsoft is beefing up their Windows security with new recovery and patching features. This does seem to primarily apply to enterprise environments, but I'm sure there will probably be some benefits on the individual end user side as well, like the home versions. So this comes in the aftermath of the CrowdStrike outage in July, which for those of you who somehow missed this, basically there's a security firm called CrowdStrike. They do a whole thing where like you can pay to download their software and it'll try to protect you from malware and things like that. Again, it's mostly used in corporate environments. Somebody pushed a bad code and crashed like a third of the planet because so many people use CrowdStrike. So after that incident, Microsoft said, hey, we're going to fix this. They have announced a whole bunch of new changes at an event called Microsoft Ignite 2024. Some of these are going to take some time to roll out, but here's what's coming up. So first off, they are going to let security products like antivirus run outside of kernel mode, which means that they will run similar to most Windows apps instead of, if I'm reading this correctly, instead of at like that deep privilege level that CrowdStrike ran on. They say this change will help security developers provide a high level of security and easier recovery, and there will be less impact to Windows in the event of a crash or mistake. This also came with like a remote recovery feature. Basically, if the Windows system won't boot, IT administrators can remote in and fix it. The other one is the administrator protection feature, which lets Windows users without administrator permissions make system changes on their PC when needed. Administrator protection creates a temporary isolated token that grants users administrator privileges, and once the user completes the task, it immediately destroys the token. Interestingly, Microsoft is introducing hot patching for Windows 11 Enterprise and Windows 365, which is basically where it can download updates and apply them immediately, but without needing a device restart, which not only means that you'll get them faster with less disruption, but it also makes users less likely to postpone updates. Some good news from Microsoft, which will immediately be followed by bad news. And that bad news is that Windows Recall is officially rolling out to insiders with Copilot Plus PCs. So for those who don't know, Windows Recall is an AI-powered feature that basically takes a screenshot of your computer. I think it's like every few minutes or every few seconds. And the whole idea is it uses AI, and you can type in, for example, if you're like, what was that website I looked at? Or in the initial version, there was literally not a single split second of thought given to things like privacy or security. Like the data wasn't encrypted. It didn't censor any passwords or credit cards. Like basically anybody who accessed that database, which could include anybody who got access to the PC remotely or locally, could access everything. There was a lot of pushback. Microsoft delayed it. They said they were going to work on it. And they did. For example, they made it opt-in. It will require the user to confirm that they're in front of the PC via Windows Hello to be able to use it. It can be removed. Now it will automatically filter things like credit cards, passwords, personal identification numbers. You can exclude specific apps or websites or in private browsing sessions. It also has malware protection features such as anti-hampering and rate limiting measures. They say that it will be strictly on device. It will never send anything back to Microsoft. And most importantly, right now, it is only supposed to be available on Copilot PCs, and I'm sure that'll change in the future. But right now, unless you specifically go out and buy one of these specifically Microsoft-approved made PCs, it should not be on your computer. But either way, be aware, this is starting to roll out.
Also, Microsoft, GitHub launches $1.25 million open source fund with a focus on security. And this is from contributors including American Express, 1Password, Shopify, Stripe, and GitHub's own company, Microsoft. So there's other donors that you can find in the show notes. Qualifying projects can be pretty much any project that has an open source license, but of course GitHub will be looking at those that need the funds most. The sum of $1.25 million might sound like a reasonable amount, but it will be split across 125 projects, which means $10,000 each.
That'll take us into research. Russian spies jumped from one network to another via Wi-Fi in an unprecedented hack. So at a security conference in Virginia, a cybersecurity researcher named Stephen Adair will reveal how his firm Velexity discovered that unprecedented Wi-Fi hacking technique, what the firm is calling a nearest neighbor attack, while investigating a network breach targeting a customer in Washington, D.C. in 2022. Velexity has since tied the breach to a Russian hacker group known as Fancy Bear, or APT-28, or Unit 26165. They're a cyber unit of the Russian military. In this case, Velexity discovered that not only the Russian hackers had jumped to the target network via Wi-Fi from a different compromised network across across the street, but also that prior to this breach had potentially been carried out from over Wi-Fi from yet another network in the same building, kind of daisy chaining of network breaches via Wi-Fi, as Adair describes it. So he says this is the first case we've worked where you have an attacker that's extremely far away and essentially broke into another organization in the US in physical proximity to the intended target, then pivoted over Wi-Fi to get into the target network across the street. That's a really interesting attack vector that we haven't seen before. Based on the timeline and the targeting of individuals within the network, they think that they were seeking intelligence about Ukraine. This happened right before and after Russia's invasion back in February of 2022. Adair argues, though, that the case should serve as a broader warning about cybersecurity threats to Wi-Fi for high-value targets, not just from the usual suspects loitering in the parking lot or the lobby. He says, now we know that a motivated nation-state is doing this and has done it. It puts on the radar that Wi-Fi security has to be ramped up a good bit. He suggests organizations that might be the target of similar remote Wi-Fi attacks consider limiting the range of their Wi-Fi, changing the network's name to make it less obvious to potential intruders, or introducing other authentication security measures to limit access to employees.
Hackers can also wirelessly watch your display with HDMI radiation. So this is from a research team in Uruguay, and they were trying to train an AI model to interpret the tiny fluctuations in electromagnetic energy from the wired HDMI signal. This actually has 70% accuracy, so the researchers claim that its system, or functionally identical alternatives, are already being used by state-level spies and industrial espionage agents. The sophisticated nature of the technique and the need to be at least somewhere in the vicinity of the target system means that it's unlikely to affect regular users, but any government agency or large company with sensitive data should be wary and might want to look into EM shielding measures, and that goes double for any of their employees who work from home.
Researchers have unearthed two previously unknown Linux backdoors. So these researchers come from ESET. They have identified multiple samples of two previously unknown backdoors called Wolfsbane and Firewood. The goal of these backdoors and tools discovered is cyber espionage that targets sensitive data, such as system information, user credentials, and specific files and directories. They are designed to maintain persistent access and execute commands stealthily, enabling prolonged intelligence gathering while evading detection. So researchers discovered the Wolfsbane samples via VirusTotal, uploaded from Taiwan, the Philippines, and Singapore, likely originating from an incident response on a compromised server. They attributed it with high confidence to Gelsemium, a China-aligned APT group, which basically means state-sponsored hackers. That group has previously targeted entities in Eastern Asia and the Middle East. They have a known history dating back to 2014, and until now, there have been no public reports of them using Linux malware. However, Wolfsbane is part of a simple loading chain consisting of the dropper, launcher, and backdoor. Part of the analyzed attack chain is also a modified open-source userland rootkit, a type of software that exists in the user space of an operating system and hides its activities. Additionally, they discovered another backdoor called Firewood. However, they cannot definitively link Firewood to other Gelsemium tools, and its presence in the archives analyzed might be coincidental. Thus, ESET attributes Firewood to Gelsemium with low confidence, considering it could be a tool shared among multiple groups. Firewood is connected to the backdoor tracked by researchers under the name Project Wood. Researchers traced it back to 2005. It's 20 years almost, and observed it evolving into more sophisticated versions. The backdoor was previously used in Operations 2 hash. The archives analyzed also contain several additional tools, mostly web shells that permit remote access by an attacker once they are installed on a compromised server, and simple utility tools.
Okay, I watched their 60-second intro video to learn how to pronounce it. It's pronounced MITRE, and they're sharing 2024's top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses. And they can pretty much assess all the CVE records for vulnerabilities, and they have their own little way of deciding this. And top 5 were cross-site scripting, out-of-bounds write, SQL injection, cross-site request forgery, and path traversal. CISA also regularly releases secure by design alerts, highlighting the prevalence of widely known and documented vulnerabilities that have yet to be eliminated from software despite there being mitigations. And last week, the FBI, the NSA, and Five Eyes cybersecurity authorities released a list on the top 15 routinely exploited security vulnerabilities last year, warning that attackers focused on targeting 0 days, which, for those who don't know, are security flaws that have been disclosed but are not yet to be patched.
Now we'll jump into the politics section, and we're going to start off with India ordering Meta to curb WhatsApp data sharing and fining them $25 million. So India's competition watchdog has ordered WhatsApp to stop sharing user data with other Meta units for advertising purposes for 5 years, and also levied a fine of $25.4 million for antitrust violations related to WhatsApp's controversial 2021 privacy policy. For those who don't know, basically in 2021, WhatsApp updated their privacy policy and said, we're going to start sharing your data with Meta at large, Facebook, Instagram, wherever we feel like it, which of course means it'll inevitably be used for targeted advertising on other platforms. Like most big tech platforms, your options were consent or go kick rocks. And thankfully, a lot of countries that actually have laws that say, no, you can't do that. Users have to have at least some level of choice over things. And India apparently is one of those countries. So they decided that this policy update constituted an abuse of Meta's dominant position by forcing users to accept expanded data collection without an opt-out option. The article had the exact numbers, but apparently WhatsApp is used by almost like half of India.
This one comes from Australia, where there's a retailer called Bunnings who has breached privacy laws by using facial recognition on customers. So this is from the Privacy Commissioner, and they found that Bunnings interfered with the privacy of hundreds of thousands of customers across 63 of its New South Wales and Victorian stores. Pretty much anyone who entered one of these stores at the time, which was 2018 through 2021, would not have been aware that facial recognition technology was in use and that their sensitive information was being collected. They said customer privacy was not at risk and the tech is necessary to prevent crime, which was the Bunnings justification. But regardless of what they think, they will have to publish a statement on its website within 30 days explaining what they did wrong, how they were using the technology, and to provide advice to customers on how to make a complaint. Consumer data advocate Kate Bauer said based on the investigation, she was confident Bunnings was not using customer biometrics with ill intent, but the surveillance needed to be reasonable. And they said that nobody wants to see antisocial behavior or crime happen in stores, but essentially what Bunnings is doing is putting all in a police lineup. They are comparing you to people who they've identified as criminals.
Our next story comes from, I believe, Italy, where a website called reversing.works did an investigation to expose Glovo's data privacy violations. Glovo, from what I can tell, is a gig work thing to have stuff delivered, I think kind of like Uber Eats or DoorDash, if I understand correctly. So Reversing Works said that Glovo's algorithmic management system was found to have misused workers' personal data in ways that violated labor law, including monitoring workers' movements outside of their work shifts, keeping hidden scores on workers, and sending detailed monitoring of their work to third parties outside the scope of their contracts. This was a mixed violation of both Italian labor law and the GDPR. Reversing Works' investigation using sophisticated reverse engineering techniques shed lights on the hidden mechanics that drive the platform's model of operation and perhaps additional business dynamics. And the article goes into much more detail on what they found and how it worked. After a year-long investigation, the DPA fined Glovo 5 million euros and demanded corrective action from the platform.
Free and open source, and we have one story here, and it's for Brave on iOS. Brave's new shred button to wipe site-specific data. When you activate this button, it deletes cookies, local storage, and network-related caches. And this is very similar to how you click the button in the DuckDuckGo browser and it gives you a cool animation. And yeah, that's kind of what they're going for, I think. You can invoke it manually by long pressing the tabs button and selecting the option from the emerging menu, or you can do it from the Shields option. And you can also activate this automatically on the active website via Shields, Advanced Controls, and Shred Site Data, which is also where the user can set Shred to activate when a site, all its tabs, is closed, or when the browser restarts. So you have a lot of flexibility in when you want this to activate automatically. And you can also apply this to all sites automatically. You can just navigate to Settings, Shields and Privacy, and Auto Shred. Now, the Brave team comments that while Shred is a step in the right direction, it is a bit limited by certain Apple restrictions, resulting in some data persisting on people's devices after activating the feature. I dug into what some of those data points are, and at least the only major thing I could find is that it doesn't shred device motion and orientation permissions. And that's not an issue on their end, it's because there's no explicit API that Apple provides via WebKit. So the team promised that Shred would soon be introduced to Brave for Android and desktop, where users are currently covered by a similar forgetful browsing feature.
And that'll take us into the Misfits section, where we just have one quick story. Fake Bitwarden ads on Facebook push info-stealing Chrome extensions. So the Facebook advertising campaign warns users that they're using an outdated version of Bitwarden and need to update the program immediately to secure their passwords. The link included in the ad is chromewebstoredownload.com, which pretends to be Google's official Chrome Web Store, which is actually chromewebstore.google.com. The landing page also featured a design closely resembling the Chrome Web Store, including an Add to Chrome button. However, instead of the extension automatically installing when you click the link, visitors are prompted to download a zip file from Google Drive.
And that's it for the week. Your phone can probably be cracked. HDMI radiation exposing your data. Malicious Bitwarden is out there, and hopefully you now know what to watch out for, you Facebook dwellers. Brave got a new feature and a lot more. Again, we can't do this podcast without our amazing supporters. We've already had to turn away a lot of sponsors, and the reason we do that is because of people who support this podcast. We have this like grassroots community, and we also have our Signal group as well, which I forgot to mention earlier, and that's been taking off as well. And we have a lot of really active people in the Signal group, and we'd love to have you all join there as well. And that's at every patron tier, I believe. So even if you join for the $5 a month, you get access to our private Signal group, and you can talk to Nate and myself. And besides that, we have VIP versions where we leave in a lot of our banter. And if you don't like Patreon for whatever reason, we also are on LibrePay, and we also support Monero tips. So check those all out in the description. Any way you can support us helps keep us going for years to come, hopefully. So the final thing we will say is the free stuff, which is make sure to share this around. We also have Surveillance Report Clips, which is a whole channel where we clip some of the other main stories from the week. So you can easily share those with people you know. They're a lot more digestible than these 20, 30 plus minute episodes. And also give a rating if you like what we do. We want to pretty much reach as many people as possible with privacy, and you can directly help us do that, even if it's for free. So thank you all for listening. Thanks for supporting what we do, and we'll see you next week.